Okay. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Welcome to the weekly webinar. We're resuming the weekly webinar for the next few weeks until pretty much the end of the year, well, the academic year. So thanks very much, everyone, for joining us. I see we've got quite a few people online today as we talk about the preparing your work plans and budgets for year two. Um, we're going to this webinar is going to be a little bit of advice. Some of the stuff from the emails that we've sent out. It's going to be some references back to some resources that were produced before, some fiscal reporting things, and there's time for a bit of Q&A, and we're also going to just walk you through the work plan and budget just through the form as we go through it. And just wanted to say one of the reasons that we're trying to do this with a little bit, offer this assistance again this year is that we know there are several people working on projects who didn't actually create the original work plans and budgets and who are now having to create a work plan and budget for year two. So forgive us if we're going over some things that may seem obvious, but there are some new people on board. And also the focus of this next year is somewhat different in that we're really focusing on sustainability and some of the other issues beyond the end of the grant. So thanks very much for joining us, everyone. We'll jump in now and away we go. So first things first, things to remember. The work plan and budget documents are due on the 4th of May, and at that point Salomon and I will look them over and we'll be reviewing them in the order in which we receive them. If we have any questions or concerns, we'll get back to you and suggest modifications, etc. And then we aim to approve those within a 2-week period. So by about mid-May, they should be all approved. And at that point, you will be eligible to continue invoicing for expenditures in quarter 5 through 8. So that's essentially how it works, because we're not forwarding any funds or advancing any funds. It'll just mean that you're essentially going to continue with the same invoicing procedures that we've used to date. We want to ensure that everyone understands that you will be budgeting for the same amount as your year one award. So if you were awarded 100,000, your budget for the second year should be 100,000. Okay. Now, several people, and we're going to speak to them individually, had proposed second year budgets that were below the amount that was awarded. And just so you know, those lower amounts have been entered into our very meager total budget for the entire initiative. So we'll only be approving budgets up to the amount that you were awarded in your second year, or the amount that you budgeted in your second year, if that is a lower amount. We can clarify that with each person individually. And the other big thing is we have created a template where we've populated some activities that we're suggesting you might want to consider. But of course, not every type of activity applies to every college. So we just want to make sure you understand you do not have to create an activity for every one of the proposed activities on the work plan. So, don't freak out. And most importantly, after this, please go online. Salomon's going to put the link to the Google Doc where you can sign up for an appointment to discuss your work plan progression. And we've left as many times as we can open on that over the next few weeks. Please just sign up. There's a Zoom link at the top of each column, and it's basically just my meeting room. So it's the standard link that I use for all our communications. So you just jump on there at your proposed time. All right. Any other points, Salomon?
I would like to add, obviously it goes without saying that the more awarded amount, then the more activities that an individual college should be able to complete. So that's something that should be correlated.
I think so. I think we've got a pretty ambitious group of colleges here, and I think, if anything, what we've discovered over the last year is that you're definitely putting more in your work plans than you may have been able to achieve in the first year. And in a way, that's it's better than underestimating what you're going to be doing. And the other great thing is about it that you all have the experience now of getting through the first year of implementation almost. And so you'll have a much better idea about what your resources are and how long things take to happen and what the realistic goals for the second year are. So, we're not concerned about anyone's ability to complete this work plan and budget accurately or effectively. I think, if anything, these are going to be stronger plans and budgets than we saw the first year round. Okay, so moving on. So, and some of these points we're just reiterating from the memo that went out with the template because they're important. So the key thing is, remember that the work plan is a guide. It's there to keep you on schedule and to keep you on track so that you don't have mission creep or you don't drift away from your really important goals. And the work plans really should reflect your priorities. So we have the 4 main areas, the makerspace, curriculum, community of practice, and the internships. And of course, particularly in the internships, everyone's stretch goal is different based on their funding level and their resources. So we want to make sure that you're thinking really about what are the main key things that you want to achieve over the course of the next year, given what you have. And so you want to make it flexible enough and the goals are achievable, and keep it fairly balanced. You should have some activities across all 4 areas. And as we go through each area, we'll make a couple of comments on their relative importance. And the other really big thing is that think about this work plan as a document that you can use to structure other proposals for other funding or for presentations to secure funding. This information essentially is a good structured draft for other grant proposals and for communication within your college if you're looking for funding from other sources like strong workforce, etc.
Yeah, and just like to add that although this is definitely your next year within this initiative, as Deborah mentioned, if you have the time to consider maybe a 5-year plan for your own purposes of internal planning, the transition from this initiative funding to potentially requesting institutional funds so that you have your institution take over some potential ongoing costs that you are putting in this particular plan, and what you're going to do with that proposal. Is it something that you need to request relatively soon, this fall, for example, for next year's 2018-2019 budget for your own institution? So those things you may want to consider, and what achievements you need to arrive to within this initiative so that you can prioritize those and plan them in here so that you can have them ready for that proposal later on this year. So it may take a little bit of reflection and a little bit of ambitious 5-year planning, but Deborah is stating something that is quite correct. If you don't plan a couple years ahead, then you may miss the mark a bit. So please do so and let us know. We will be glad to even talk to you about further planning that may be available to some of you.
Now, a key thing, we had our advisory meeting a couple of weeks ago, and the advisory committee was really, I think, impressed by the level of work that's being produced across the network and in many of the colleges. In fact, maybe actually, Salomon, you should talk about this because you were more closely involved in that conversation. But
right.
There's some key recommendations came out that you might want to consider.
Right. We haven't spent too much time within our symposium or even webinars, but this is the first time we kind of bring this up with the advisory, which is a trove of direction, and their main story that they would like for us to develop is the fact that we do have an asset-based value system within our maker spaces. In other words, that we're building value within our student learning, within the communities that we're building, within the extension to our partnerships, not only to industry and business, but also to K-12 and other nonprofit organizations. And that these activities that are embedded within this initiative should be brought up to a larger sort of statewide story built from your individual stories, so that we do go forward and provide action items that are fundable, that are achievable to other foundations, funded by other foundations, and can be definitely an asset-based, as they describe, asset-based inclusive economic development model that is being developed here, which was quite ambitious, and there'll be more discussions, I'm sure, as we go forward and tease out those particular indications that the advisory board provided. But that is something that we're working on and grappling to see how we can gather this information. Partly it will be your blog posts, so there's going to be some push that hasn't been already from Karen to make certain that your blog posts are up to date and that we can actually take some information from there. There will be further push of data towards the end of this initiative to see how your students have progressed within this short period of time. And so there's other items that we're considering for this plan of sustainability that will help you then in turn use this information for your own funding purposes. So this is something of great importance from my advisory panel that we can share here.
Yes, so anything you can do to get the stories out, and so documenting, obviously, blog posts, any publications, any press releases, conference presentations, and specifically information that shows the breadth of your network. And it's this idea about the sustainability of the network that the advisors were really interested in, and think that has the longest term value for this initiative. So it's not about any one college, it's about the level of interaction and mutual support between the colleges, and how we as the statewide team can help to leverage support for the entire network moving forward. So getting that story out, telling the story is really, really important. And we're doing a really phenomenal job. The last newsletter that just went out had an extremely high open rate, and apparently a very large number of people are opening the newsletter within 15 minutes of its arrival, which shows that there are a lot of people really following the work that's going on in this initiative with a lot of interest, and particularly in the Chancellor's office, but also now at a national level. So, yes, so that's that. But sustainability is this key idea. Short-term, long-term, think about the impact that you were outlining in your logic plan, in your logic model when we started this process. How close are you getting to those levels of impact that you were projecting at that time? And how do you envisage bridging to that long-term sustainability? And then it will really help us if we're thinking about this as a whole network. Okay, so sustainability is one thing, and then building on what you've learned from year one. So go back and look at your year one work plan critically, and really evaluate what you were able to achieve and what you felt took longer or you were not able to get to in year one that you may want to carry into year two. Think about ways that you could refine the way you're thinking about activities to actually leverage one activity into another, so that you're building a structured sort of pathway for people coming into the makerspace. Visualize the conclusion, a successful conclusion, like what will your project look like at the end of next May? And how do you plan to transition into a different funding source or another way of operating? So, so always thinking beyond, looking back and thinking about how you can iterate into an effective plan and budget for the following year. So, I mean, think about it. We're still thinking about this in a design thinking framework. And obviously, we would encourage everyone to experiment and to put in those ideas that you think you are in the area that you want to work in and where you believe you can achieve results.
And I just want to add that although some of you may be thinking right now, well, year one, we just got started, because a lot of you got your budgets loaded a little bit later, your contracts a little bit later in the year. So it feels like you just got started and we're already asking you to think about year one. So I realize that's always a difficult shift in your mind. Do plan to be active over the summer, although there may not be classes going on or for that matter, many students, but there's a lot of things you can start testing and doing to, as Deborah was mentioning, thinking through processes and procedures with smaller groups of students, so that in the fall you really have something well developed and can really wrap up much quicker, since really the fall, this fall coming up will be probably your prime full-blown everything, working, all the planning and processing that you've been doing will be fully operational. Although you may have your budgets a little bit later in the year, that's another thing you need to anticipate as well. Sometimes your colleges may not load up budgets until September, or hopefully not as late as October, because some of you have to wait for your boards to approve some of these budgets. So hopefully you get all that squared away by July, August, so that you're not delayed with this sort of slump that happens around the August, September timeframe due to budget approvals.
And given that you've probably learned the deadlines your college has for equipment orders, etc., now that you know that cutoff can be very early in the year, remember that all expenditures have to be completed by the end of May 2019. So any final expenditures or proposed activities that are going to be subject to that timeline need to be really built in early to your timeline, because you don't want to get caught running out of time at the end. Also, the same thing goes for the internships too, because as you're planning on, many of the colleges are planning on internships over the summer. We will not have that opportunity next year, because as we end at the end of May, you won't be able to complete internships over that summer. So it's going to be quite a race to the finish, as I'm sure you are already aware. Okay. Following on this, I've already mentioned the last one, but remember in your budget a couple of key things. If your work plan is effectively developed and accurate, you won't need to be moving money around and doing budget transfers to the degree that you were this year. And we know that people had to do budget transfers because of challenges ordering equipment or the slow hiring practices where you maybe had to bring in a consultant instead of an employee. Those sorts of things you can anticipate, I think, more effectively now, having had that experience in year one. Also, go back and check out Appendix C on allowable expenses, particularly things like no gifts of public funds. This is really key, because that means that even something like a gift card, but anything with a financial value cannot be used as an award. You might want to think about, if you do want to provide those kinds of incentives or prizes, perhaps that could be arranged through funding from your foundation or another source that's not subject to those constraints. And remember too, the other provision that we brought in at the beginning of the project, which is a maximum of 2% of your awarded amount per year on facilities improvement. And most people have done that work now, but if you are looking at additional work, electrical, plumbing, etc., please be aware that 2% of your award for year two is the limit for that. Anything else? Nope. Okay. Oh, you know what? And I'm sorry, I think I've accidentally skipped to the end on this, so I'm just going to jump back.
As you're doing that, Deborah, that's
Yeah.
something that, as to reiterate, that definitely spending some time in reviewing year one activities and achievements, planning out for year 5, and working backwards for sustainability and finding the sweet spot of what you can achieve for year 2, so that you not only achieve it, hit the metrics that you're planning to provide, so that you can, again, think about sustainability. And likewise, minimize any budget transfers because you're reaching exactly what you're planning to do. That takes a lot of planning and maybe some a great design thinking session with some of those Post-its and moving things around and having a real activity with not only your staff, but inviting your students. I think that was one thing for those of you who were in attendance last week at Folsom with a curricular symposium. The students were adamant to include them in your planning, not only for the curriculum, but also the makerspace. So that's something that you may want to also take their input to see what sort of things you can provide for them and balance everything out. I know it seems like a lot of work, especially to achieve within the next couple of weeks, but that's something that why we're putting this together and offering some assistance through this.
Okay, good. Here we are. We are on track. So we've put together a couple of resources. These links will be active in the slide deck when you download it. But there's the original work plan webinar that we recorded, well, a year ago. There's the link to the Google Doc where you can sign up for a 1-hour session with us at some time over the next couple of weeks. And then there's also the webinar that Tony made about fiscal reporting, which includes Appendix C. So you'll be seeing that in the webinar recording slide deck, which we'll post on Workplace and on cccmaker.com under webinars. So I think if there's nothing further on this part, Solomon, I'm going to jump off this and then open up the template itself. Okay, good.
Yes. Just a couple of questions that have come in as you transition, Deborah. There was a question about college boards needing to approve the second contract separately. There will be a separate contract to Sierra College, from Sierra College to your college for the second year award. Until then, there's going to be a letter of award being sent soon, so that you can take that to your accounting staff and have that being in the plans. Yet there's processes within each college that year 2 budget as an entirety of the college funds needs to be approved by the board, and that may not happen until even in September, hopefully even earlier, July, August. And what happens if between them there's sort of a provisional budget approved such that operational things still happen. So you want to plan ahead that if your letters are in there, your staffing isn't in there, your letter of award that will soon be out isn't in there, that you can't do any spending before then. So that's a lull that I was referring to, that you just need to plan ahead and make certain that all the right accounting and projected budgets are in hand in your business offices, so that it doesn't impact your hiring or anything like that. Purchasing may be delayed. That's one thing that typically happens because of the invoicing and all those sort of details that happens in between. But staffing, you want to make sure that the budget is in there adequately enough so that you can sustain that over the summertime and before the budget is approved.
Okay. Yeah. I was also thinking too, the carryover funds, for those who are carrying over funds, you have the flexibility to use that funding to cover that patch as well. Not everyone has that, so I know that several are facing those challenges. I see a question from David about funding facility improvements combined in the year 2. We'll have to talk about that separately, I think, but that's an interesting idea. Okay, so I'm just going to jump over to the template itself, and for those of you who produced a work plan and budget last year, you'll recognise that the form is essentially the same. We've just added some pre-populated parts on it. So once again, the first thing is notice that the fiscal year is now 2018-2019. This is supposed to be a pull-down menu for the district, but I see it's not working in this particular one. So we can double check that if necessary. But if you just enter your college name in this cell here, it'll carry over for the remainder of the document. Please make sure also that you put your college name in the title of the file so that we don't have to go digging down into it to see which college it's from. It would really help us. It makes life easier. So we're just going to work through each of the tabs in the folder at this point, in the sheet at this point. So here we go. And Salomon, I guess you jump in on the budget
stuff.
Right,
so this is so we start with the budget because that's typically the most referenced document for many reasons operationally, although it may not be the first one that you start actually working on. So we're going to present it in the order that you see them, but yet typically when you actually do this, you will begin towards the end of this template. So this is a budget summary, which is actually will be summed for you. So you don't necessarily need to input anything here because this is all formula based. But this is the overall categorical spending by the different classifications that you see here. So for those of you who are familiar with this, when you change amounts of more than 10% within each classification, that's when a budget transfer is typically triggered. But within each classification, even if you're off less than 10%, and that's not considered a trigger for budget transfer. But this is a summative sheet with formulas, and the 33% that is required, that actually also gets computed from the amount in the first sheet that Deborah just showed, where you put in your total amount in there. It'll show you here how much of that 33% you need to consider for matching. And we'll talk about matching a little bit further in another webinar, but that's something that will be considered for Q4 in your final report. On the next one, this is really where you get into the detail of your particular budget itself. So again, it's general classification in here, and I think there may be a more detailed one, an example of, sorry, it's an example. So if you're not familiar with the different spending classifications, there's a detailed sheet sample right next to this one, but you would then borrow that, put that in here. Anything regarding to your staffing, of course, is the 1,000 and 2,000s. The 3,000s is benefits. Each one of your colleges has a different formula for different groups for the benefits. If you want to just cover, you can do it in sort of a average amount. If you can do that for the respective expenditure of personnel in the 1,000 and 2,000s. And then once again, when you get further down to the 4,000s, which are typically supplies for the majority of you, you want to make certain that you think about what you used for your makerspace this past year, how much materials, how many supplies, books, those sort of things would be in the 4,000s. The 5,000s is going to be the larger expenditures where you have travel for conferences, so don't forget your Maker Faire attendance. Any trips that you may take to the symposiums for this initiative, travel expenses, meals, hotel, those sort of things, or any other conferences that you may want to plan specifically for your makerspace itself. Any contract services, if you have anyone on a contract that is providing some guidance for your makerspace, that typically, once again, will go in the 5,000s as well, subcontractors, that sort of things. Equipment and maintenance under $5,000 would typically go in here as well. Anything larger than that, capital outlay, that's the 6,000s. And that's where anything that's a 2% that may be triggered would go in the 6,000s column in there. So look at the next sheet for those example headings and plan ahead. But you would typically do this after you write a little bit more in your work plan, which is going to be further along. But this will first give you a sense of how much, where to put in each category by looking at year one. It will give you a good starting point for your budget nonetheless. And you can see how it'll get summed up to your budget detail sheet budget summary, which was the previous sheet.
Great. And this is the budget match category, which I think, Salomon, you were saying that this automatically adds back to the previous sheet, right? Those cells.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. That detailed summary sheet is, again, takes the input here. And this is important because you'll have your calculation of what you're requesting. That 30% number will be in here. And so as you plan for your match, it'll get summed up and, of course, reverted back to the summary sheet. So even this will take some thinking. You know, some of you, for the most part, I would say 33% of you did include like someone's salary within the project that your college is already paying into this match, which is totally acceptable, and go ahead and still do that. But if you're considering the 5-year growth and 5-year plan of this particular project, this is where you may want to consider what you're going to be doing with your foundation, with your employers, within your network, and those sort of aspects that could be aspirational for you to try to meet as match here. In other words, you can always revert back to using salaries of someone in this project for reporting for this initiative, which is totally acceptable. Yet I would encourage you to be ambitious and to be put in here as your plan some outreach efforts, some campaign with your foundation, some membership with employers to sustain your internship payments. You know, put that in here. This is a bold affirmation of what you're doing, and a lot of you are definitely en route to making this formative aspect of your project here, and put those in here as a match, and that way you can act upon them at the right time.
Great, thank you. So now we move to the individual work plans. Oh, actually, budget narrative. There we go. So this, once again, is a brief section describing your overall approach to the fiscal management of your project over the next year. It can include these references to sustainability in the future, sure, and it can also include what your, once again, what your priorities are, and how you're focusing your financial resources to support your key priorities within the project. So, I mean, that's a big part of what we're doing here. You're really trying to create areas where you can really focus. So there's the must-haves, and then the nice-to-haves, and then other elements that you may not be able to reach even within this next, second and final year. But this is where you can really show how you're thinking about those pieces working together. Okay, so when we move to the 4 individual work plans, it's exactly the same categories as we had last year. So it's the internships, makerspace, etc. And the big difference that you would see this time around is that we've created a pre-populated list of activities, and so each of these work plans has 9 suggested areas to consider, and then a final one at the end where if you want to add something else, if you're going to do all of the 9 and then you want to do more as well, okay. And if you need to add more than that, you can just copy and paste these cells again. But what we've done is created a sort of a logical sequential list through that overall outcome of elements that will contribute to a successful result. So the first part would be, what are you going to do around outreach to employers? So in other words, how are you going to get the employers on board? Then the second one, how are you going to prepare the students for their internships? Then how are you going to actually organize and coordinate the internships? And key over here too is the personnel. And then how are you going to evaluate them? Then if you're focusing also on student entrepreneurship, if you have students who'll be doing the entrepreneurship type internship, working with an approved business plan and having an external independent person evaluate the internship in the development of that entrepreneurial exercise, then you would definitely be putting some activity in this area. And then another idea of how are you going to facilitate, say, students who've completed an internship in year one, and then how are they going to then mentor and help students who are coming in the second year. And then there's also a type of internship which was added fairly recently, and Salomon, you may want to just recap that again, which enables a student to actually be paid after the internship, if you want to mention that. I think, did you call it the slingshot? Was that that's the slingshot idea?
Right. For those of you that are involved with internships, there's a couple more that we added, and one was that it's called a retro, right, where someone completed an internship through a credit program, for example, or maybe they were paid by an employer or some other ways paid outside of the funds from the Foundation of California Community Colleges, but they kind of work in your makerspace to as within a foundation internship to then work to communicate their internship goals, the activities, the outcomes in some presentation process to other students, obviously, to help proliferate their experience within your makerspace. So that's that would be the retro, and the slingshot, it would be one that they're in the middle of that internship, but then they're in the middle of a credit internship and they come into the makerspace for some training.
Right. And then the later ones, 1.7, 1.8, 1.9, these are the same on each of the 4 work plans. So as we mentioned earlier, the importance of telling your story, blog posts, press releases, etc., that we expect that every college will have activities entered in that 0.7 section. We also have the reporting component, which everyone's doing anyway. So that's an element in the activities. And then we've added an additional component of sustainability. So what specific activity do you have that will sustain the internships after the completion of the project? And then, as I mentioned earlier, if you want to add more activities, they're there. Now, when you've entered your activity, and this will be the same for everyone that you want, you can use this, click on the cell here, and we have a pull-down menu of all of these familiar elements that you're used to, the metrics that you report in your quarterly report. So you can choose a metric that most closely responds to or relates to the activity that you're describing. So, for example, you might, with employer relations, you might, this could come under employers recruited, or it could also come under hours of employment, employer match, if there are employers who are actually contributing to bringing in other employers, etc. So there's different ways that can be, this could be thought of. You don't have to. There's no necessarily right answer for this. This is really to also help you think about how do my activities result in a measurable outcome that I can then report on, which can then help me with sustainability, etc. later on. If it applies to more than one metric, you can always enter that additional metric in the cell below. And then we have, with the performance outcomes, obviously the metric is one of those outcomes from that activity. But if there are additional elements that you want to refer to that are specific to that activity but are not necessarily measurable, but are nevertheless important, maybe because they contribute to the next stage of the path or whatever, then you can enter those there. Timelines, think very carefully about how long things take, because we've all had a lot of experience of that over the last year. And then who are the responsible persons? Fortunately, most of our teams are pretty stable at this time. People have been hired or are on a consultant basis, so the teams are fairly set. So that's the first one. Is there anything to add to that, Salomon, in terms of the internships?
Well, and just in general, I hope folks who are seeing this appreciate the work that Deborah did here for this template. It's, I think, a very streamlined approach to the activities within the work plan and the outcomes. And just to reiterate, this is, when you fill this out, hopefully at this point, you've done maybe a post-it exercise with different people and personnel and activities that you're already considering within your institution, and that you're just kind of putting that in here in the timelines of months, for example, what's achievable in the month of August, September, etc. And to sort of address a question that was posted on the chat, the texts that are here in terms of the activities and the selection of the performance outcomes is really almost halfway to achieving that entirety of that cell. The cells beneath that Deborah was referring to, adding additional outcomes and text, is for yourself to provide indication of how you will provide these activities. Is like, for example, who's responsible for that activity, I believe is one aspect that you can include in there, and how you're going to undertake that. But for the most part, that it is more than halfway to the achievement of that activity, just what is provided for you in the template. The outcome, as Deborah mentioned, you can select the best one that fits to you. It's flexible. There's typically one that is probably of higher selection, but don't feel compelled to always choose that one. If you're, for example, if employers are providing volunteer and that you're going just for that option, then obviously you're just going to be doing the volunteer recruitment or volunteer hours as a metric probably in your particular work plan. So it's really flexible for you to select which activities, how they're going to be achieved, and also the outcomes, and which one is more important for yourself as you consider the sustainability of this initiative. So I think I appreciate the flexibility in this that Deborah put together. I commend her here publicly to have you guys go through this effectively. So.
Yeah, well, and please, my intention was to make it easier. That was the goal. So please take it in that spirit. Okay, so thanks. Moving on to the next one. When we get to our makerspace, it's exactly the same format, the same pull-down menu, metrics, etc. And once again, one of the reasons I put this front and center about access and inclusivity is that we really need to focus on our underrepresented students and non-traditional students. That is an area where I think, given the challenges of the first year, getting spaces up and running and setting up systems, I don't believe we've given this the attention that it really requires. We're seeing a lot of success in bringing in underrepresented students, and many of the colleges have specific activities that are focused on equity and outreach to particularly women in STEM. So there's some great stuff happening there. I just thought it would be really good if everyone thought about a way that you could either interpret an activity that you're currently doing or additional work that you're doing to really focus on this. Because as Salomon mentioned earlier, the diversity of the community college population is one of our great assets. And this was something that the advisory really drew on, that this is actually something that gives us value because we have cultural, global perspectives happening within our student body. It's an extraordinary resource, and we really need to leverage that. And we're also, most of our colleges are Hispanic serving institutions, so we really need to be thinking about serving the students and meeting the students where they are and getting them into our spaces and working. So that's a key part. Then community outreach, how are we getting the community involved, K-12, etc. How are we measuring our makerspace usage? Several colleges have a swipe-in system, but a key thing to remember, we won't be gathering this data this year because we've decided that it's too new. But by the end of this project, we want to be able to measure metrics on ethnicity, etc., through capturing student ID numbers for students who are using the makerspace. So think about how you're going to start gathering those that information, so we can then use other institutional research from your institution to really show how the makerspace is impacting the success of those students. This is key to arguing for further resources and sustainability. Then obviously we've got things like safety training, workshops. This is where your badging can come in. Additional research and purchase of equipment. This is where your facilities upgrade could come in. And then once again, telling your story, tell us what's going on, show us your new equipment, put some videos of work being done on the equipment. Then once again, the data, and then the sustainability. How are you thinking about long-term support for your makerspace, institutionalizing positions, etc. And then of course you can add others there.
Yeah, this outcome is a good one to really present impact to your institution and constituents. So as indicated, how many students are being affected with your makerspace is a great opportunity for you to capture not only the quantity of students, but again, the diversity of the students and even their disciplines, and then try to do long-term planning with those students as a correlation to how much time they spend within the makerspace for various activities that you're considering. So this is a really good time to think about impact and how you're going to capture that.
Okay. And then moving on to curriculum, which of course is something we've only really just started looking at. So we expect that this area is going to see a lot of development over the next year. So once again, in a sort of a logical way, let's start with students and think about, and as those who were at the symposium on Friday really saw, we're thinking about curriculum in a really broad sense. I beg your pardon, I'm on community of practice. Hang on, I'm going to just jump to curriculum. We're thinking about curriculum in a really broad way. We're thinking about it as the complete kind of the sequence of learning experiences. It's not just about the content, but it's about the pedagogy. It's about the really focusing on the outcomes and thinking about this as part of a career pathway, etc. So putting it in the context of that. So first up, once again, is how is this connecting to industry? So what about advisories, surveys, outreach that you're doing to the business community? How is your curriculum aligning? Are you incorporating soft skills training for your students, either as part of internship preparation or as part of your overall curriculum? Is it embedded in classes or is it standalone? Are you using New World of Work, etc.? That could go in here. Curriculum innovation in 4.3. This is what many of you have started as you're writing new courses and workshops. Think about how you're embedding that innovation within the curriculum. So you may want to have a workshop for faculty where you work on contextualizing academics or math remediation or something like that into workshops and programs. So it would show up partly in community of practice, but it would also show up in the curriculum. Really think, and once again, this is for sustainability, really think about how not-for-credit, non-credit, and the transition into credit courses and stackable certificates could work for you. Salomon, do you want to jump in there about,
Yeah, no, this is key right here. This one, 4.4, we should almost all collectively put something similarly here, because this is, I believe, a key to your sustainability of your makerspace. And Rob actually just chimed in as well in the chat to us, but I will vocalize what he wrote. Using a non-credit course, which can be achieved through a open exit or open entry, which essentially is called positive attendance in many of our institutions, and recording that period of time and getting apportionment of the time being spent of the student within that space is definitely a way to sustain this. And it's of no impact to the financial aid to the student because it would be a non-credit class. You can get funding because you're capturing the time that the students are being spent there. It can be an assistance to the credit classes, so it can be a sort of a parallel course to a credit class. It can be also a prerequisite for a credit class. A non-credit class can be a prerequisite to a credit class as well, so you make certain that students are registering for that non-credit as well. So there's a lot of opportunity here with working with a non-credit. Obviously, it takes conversations with your institution and how that's structured. And there's, I know, departments and even faculty divisions that unfortunately happens in some of our institutions within this paradigm. But I do believe you should embrace this particular section right here for sustainability and of course, plan out within your particular disciplines. And as Deborah mentioned, stack the credentials.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and then we also have, badging and credentialing here. If you're doing industry based credentialing, or there's a whole variety of things that can be brought in here as well. Added annual program review for CTE programs. You're on a 2-year review cycle, and you're doing an annual program review. This is a great place to be putting in the work that you're doing in your makerspace to really boost the not just the achievements of your program, but your program review will help you define long-term goals that can be then funded through your institution. If it's not in your annual program review and your plan, then it's not going to be funded. So really think about how you can take the work plan you're working on now and bring the results of that into your annual review. And that also means thinking about existing programs that you may want to revise, or new programs that you may be bringing in or replacing old programs with the new ones. Once again, we're down to 4.7 is tell your story, curriculum reporting, and then sustainability. And if you have other curriculum activities that you're doing as well, you can always add another there. Any more on that, Solomon, or are we?
This one would be good for those of you that would like to include conferences that you would like to present some of your curriculum. There's a lot of opportunities, not only here locally in California with CCC AOE, but that would be something that I would consider in this section for the collaboration that you may be doing with other faculty, specifically to enter conferences to present some of that work. That would be great, along with a blog post for outreach opportunities.
Great. So thanks, Solomon. Wow, can't believe it. We're nearly at an hour, but we've just got one more to go. So the community of practice, and arguably, based on the feedback from our advisory and what we're starting to see in terms of the attention to this initiative and what we think might be the long-term draw and the biggest advantage that we have is the strength of the community of practice. So we really encourage everyone to get involved with your neighbouring colleges and the work that we're doing at the state level. The turnout for the symposia have been fantastic, and we really want to continue to build the work that's going on currently. We have an extraordinary situation over the next 2 weeks where 3 colleges are each holding mini maker fairs. Moore Park, Allen Hancock, and then College of the Canyons, where both Moore Park and Allen Hancock are also collaborating with College of the Canyons on their Maker Fair. And they're looking at an attendance of between 3,000 and 5,000 people. So that is the strength of these collaborations and what can be achieved. And the level of sponsorship the College of the Canyons is getting as a result of this collaboration and actively reaching out to their community, both K-12 and colleges, is pretty extraordinary. So we know that this is working. But even more than that, there's sort of the emotional support that you get from feeling that you are part of this larger team, because we know some of you are working in environments that are either geographically a little isolated, or there's not too many people in your institution that necessarily understand what you're doing. So it's really important that you draw on the network to both sustain you, but also to use those messages to educate your colleagues and your college leadership. So that's what we're here for. We're here to present this really compelling and strong movement that's gaining momentum, and we want to help you succeed through this community. So a lot of it starts with students. So get your clubs, your student clubs on board. Think about how the associated students and alumni organizations can help you. Do you have graduates from your programs on your advisory? You know, are you creating that kind of cross collaboration throughout your community? We've seen this in the last, in the symposia. The students are your most articulate advocates, and they can be incredibly powerful in achieving the next step of sustainability and institutionalization. So you really think about how the students are going to be involved. Think about your institutional leadership. How are you going to very deliberately communicate with them and target them so that they know exactly what amazing things are happening in your makerspace? Once again, how can employers support your work, either through the volunteer matches or through faculty externships? If a faculty can go and work with an employer to learn about new technologies or workflows, that's a great opportunity as well. Are you connecting with your K-12 partners? Are you doing, say, summer jams or transitions for incoming students and offering the makerspace as a way of transitioning students into exploring new careers in college? What are you doing with your community stakeholders? Are there other, you know, and then here's the big thing, as I mentioned earlier, what are you doing with your other CCC maker partner colleges? You don't have to just collaborate across your regions. You can also collaborate around specific programs that you might have in common. So if you're if you're interested in VR and there are other colleges working on VR, get together and start thinking about how you can collaborate and talk through projects and approaches and strategies. And there we are again at our 3 points: telling your story, community of practice reporting, and then how are you going to sustain your community of practice after the end of the project? And then, of course, you can always add in more there. So,
just some last points on sustainability. Don't neglect Perkins funding, which is ongoing for colleges. Clue into that. Strong workforce funding. That's another ongoing funding source that would be, you know, also soft money. But definitely the general funds are something that we're all aspiring to get to. Deborah, is there time to address some of the questions that have been coming through?
Yeah, please go ahead. I think we've covered the form.
So there was a question related to carryover of the match to year 2. I think we're going to have to get back to everyone regarding that carryover of the match, since it really depends on how Sierra College is having to report this match to the Chancellor's office. And so if they need to report that 33% of the match needs to happen within the reporting period of their specific report to the Chancellor's office, then I don't know, you know, well, anyways, but it depends on what they need to report, which I don't think Deborah and I know necessarily how that's being reported to the Chancellor's office, so we may have to respond back to everyone regarding the carryover of the match. This is of the match. And then lastly, there was a question about year 2 budget and how it shifts. So some of you have submitted a 10% carryover from year 1 to year 2, but that is, correct me if I'm wrong, Deborah, a separate budget. That's still part of year 1 budget.
It's still part of year 1 budget. There's a lot of flexibility in how you can use that funding. But it must be, I'm trying to remember the date, it has to be spent out, I think, and reported. Spent out, is it by the end of September and reported?
Right.
So you get a couple of months to work with it.
Right. So it's still year one, and it's not necessarily affecting anything in year two. You don't have to consider that within this form as well. So I don't know if that answers the question that was related to that 10% transfer. And there was a question of, I did repost Rob's comment about the positive attendance non-credit exit entry makerspace over at Butte. I don't think Daniel's on the call today, but he's active on Workplace, so I know he's active there, and feel free to ping him for any information on Workplace. I'm sure he'll be glad to share. So
I'm looking at Rob's question about the initial year two budget. I'm not quite sure. Salomon, do you get that question?
that was the one that I was trying to frame in terms of the 10% counting.
Oh, okay, right.
Yeah, but I'm not 100% sure, Rob. Let us know on the comments if that answered your question or not. I attempted to answer.
Yeah, Rob's scheduled for a meeting. We've got him on the Google Docs, so we'll be talking with you about that later, Rob. Michael, I see that you've got a question about whether we're expecting text in each of those category cells. No, not necessarily. I don't know that everyone could do everything. I think maybe in our dreams, but you definitely want to choose the ones that are the most important. And I mean, there's different ways of thinking about that. Do you want to select the things that you think are going to contribute most to your sustainability? You're going to choose the things that you're already doing well and really try to push those and get the most out of them? Or are you going to choose the things that you feel you're really behind on, and if you don't make some progress on those, it's not going to tie into the entire system? So that's a strategic way of thinking. Do you push for what you're already doing? Do you try to pull up the things that are lagging behind? And what's going to help you in the long term? So we don't expect everyone to do everything, but we really expect you to really think through carefully what you can get out of this next year and what you should focus on.
So I did get clarification, Deborah, from Rob. His question was, do we have to put the same amounts in the same categories as year one? So not just the same fund, but the same amounts. And that is a no. You can your total categorical around. That's why this is being sent out once again for you to populate with detail. So the numbers can be different for each classification and each category. Yet, as before, if you're going to do any changes, budget transfers in the future, that 10% within those categories, that still will be part of just accounting procedural efforts after your year two gets approved. So that's still in place. The transfer of 10% within each category is still there. Yet the amounts for each category can be different for year two.
That's right. So essentially, we're starting from scratch again. It's think of it as another iteration. It's another prototype in our grand experiment.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm not sure. Are there any other questions?
No, we just have to get back regarding the 4% cumulative improvements and the carryover for the match.
Right, great. So remember, thanks very much for bearing with us. I know we're going a little over time. Please use the Google Doc to sign up for a time. We've already got, Rob, you're already signed up, and there's a couple of others in there as well. Jump in and secure your time. As I said before, we've tried to make the schedule as open as possible. Please forgive us if we have to start blacking out parts of the schedule as we go, as other things come up, but right now it's fairly open. Once again, think about these, all of these items in terms of your priorities. Make sure that there's a person, an individual responsible for each of these pieces. If you don't have the personnel, then you have to think carefully about what you can actually achieve. and really think about the timelines realistically, what it's going to take to achieve these, think holistically about this as a plan. If you want to, you are also free to create a draft of this and send it to us. We'll look it over. In fact, if you want to do that before we talk at a Zoom meeting individually, that would be really helpful. But we're very open to try and help you develop the most effective plan that you can between now and May 4. And then on May 4th, I think you're just going to be emailing those directly to us, and I'll make sure they get into the right Dropbox folder. So if there are any other questions, you're welcome to email us as well. And as we said earlier, this is being recorded and we'll post it on the website, and I'll also post a link on Workplace. So if there are no further questions, I think we might be done.
Thank you, everyone. All
right. Thank you very much, everyone. It was great to see so many people on board for the webinar today. We have another one next week, and we'll be doing them regularly from now on until the end of the year. So thank you very much, everyone, and we'll see you soon. Bye.